Hey everyone, welcome to 18Xonomics, a cardboard reality podcast centered around heavy economic games in the 18XX genre. I'm your host, Joel Mosier. Today on the pilot episode, Nick and I discuss 1849, an 18XX game set in Sicily with some brutal operations. As our first step further in the genre from the likes of 1889, it brings some new strategies to the table, particularly incremental capitalization, but more on that later. We wrap up with a short segment on how to get started with your passion. Enjoy the show. So, Nick, how's it going?
It's going fantastic, Joel.
Even though we've already been talking to each other for like an hour.
It is hilarious. We've already done this greeting just on a different show.
Yeah.
My week has been hectic. I interviewed for a job that I am not qualified for in any way. Well, in most ways. In one major way. I'm not technically qualified for the job. But I have all the other qualifications they could be looking for in a candidate. It's an internal position that I've applied for. So
and that's the key is that it's internal.
I have been stressed out of my mind this past week for that interview. Interview went really well. My supervisor said that he was very proud of the interview. Basically, at this point, they're just waiting to see if the other people that are interviewing for that position, the external candidates, have the technical qualifications and all of the personable and culture fitting traits that I bring to the table. And if that's the case, I totally get it. Like, this isn't something I would have been able to interview outside of this position at this company.
Sure.
So I'm just glad to have put myself out there. I'll let the cards fall where they may. And now I'm not worrying about it. I'm just kicking back and talking about some 18XX with my buddy Joel.
Absolutely. So pretty excited for this new format we got going. Really excited to just dive into more 18XX and heavy economic games personally. Because I know sometimes they don't make it on our regular show. So they get to focus. So.
Well, and before we get too far into this show, I feel like you should let people know how you come up with your really cool name for your show.
Oh, you mean the one that you came up with?
Yeah, I did.
So, as you could probably tell, the name of the show is a mixture of 18XX and economics. So, no, you don't say. So, like, the X replaces the echo part of economics, or I guess not the O, just the EC part. So and it kind of just rolls off the tongue. Xonomics, 18Xonomics.
I think it works. Joel was like, I really want the title of the show to be focused on 18XX, but I also want to leave room to talk about other types of economic or like heavy Euro games. And I was like, all right, 18XX economics, 18XX economics. All right.
Yep. So just drop one X and it worked.
It worked out.
So like we stated earlier, 1849. Been playing it. We've played it twice now. Our previous experience with 18XX has been 1846 and 1889. Both intro. 1846 we may cover at a later point in time. Maybe not entirely an intro 18XX, but that's for another time. So we'll probably be primarily focusing on comparing 1849 to 1889 as like our intro, and then the next step up to 1849. So 1849, the game of Sicilian railways, based in Sicily, like I mentioned earlier. Definitely a much smaller map than we've dealt with previously, but that doesn't necessarily mean a shorter game.
The 1889 map is pretty small too, but I feel like this one is extra small.
And what makes it so much feel so much bigger is the fact that the cost to build on the terrain is a lot more than in like 1889 or in 1846.
Right. So expansion's not as fast.
Yeah, it's much slower moving. And also it's an incremental capitalization, which we'll kind of get to a little bit later, but basically your capital builds up at a much slower rate.
Yep.
More gradual over time rather than getting it like all at once in full capitalization games.
Sure.
Which is what 1889 is.
So do you want to go over just like our initial impressions after play 1 before we dive into the second play, which is, I'm assuming, what the bulk of this will be about?
Sure. That's fine.
So 1849, we sat down and played it with Jonah, our first play, and Andrew.
Yep.
And it was a rough first play. I think trying to grok and understand how the whole train system worked in 1849 and understanding the different rail types, because you have narrow gauge and standard gauge,
and then full gauge. Yeah, which is kind of covers both.
Both, right? So understanding that and the hex trains, which that's not so bad to get through. But then I think the real tricky part of this game comes in with the incremental capitalization, and how that affects the initial funding into your train company and how quickly you can go out of business and close down if you opened the wrong company at the wrong time or tried to be too ambitious, where this game is a lot less unforgiving than 89 was.
Yes.
So just to quickly summarize our first play of this game.
More unforgiving.
Yeah, more unforgiving. So just to summarize the first play, I started the blue company, which we'll get into a little bit later. And that was because you're kind of forced in a certain order on starting companies.
Yep. And so you get a little bit of variation.
Yeah, because you number the companies, and whichever company is the lowest in chronological order is the one you have to pick if you are opting to do the action of starting a company on your stock round turn.
Yep.
And so I started blue company. The blue company seemed great. Like, it wasn't that expensive to get into, and I started it at the low value that you could start it at. And what turned out, what I thought would be a good idea ended up not being a good idea at all, because the blue company has a really hard time expanding out at the beginning of the game because of the expensive terrain that it's near.
Yep. And the expensive terrain on one side and a private company blocking off the one space on the other side.
Yeah, there is a private company that's blocking you from actually expanding the way you should expand.
Yep. Which, if you own that private, I think that might work out okay in your favor. But if not, in the first game, I don't think it was that private was bought in for a really long time, and so it just really sunk you early game.
Yeah, and even that, like, if you buy the blue company, like the first round, you can't buy privates until somewhere in the green phase.
Until a six train is bought.
So there's still the first few stock rounds that you may go through, or the first couple stock rounds at least, where you aren't able to run a train. And since you're not paying out dividends for your investors, then you're going to move left on the stock market, and your stock value starts decreasing. And it doesn't take too long before you get to that column in the far left that just means every time you move left, since you're all the way left, you just keep dropping until you close. And I didn't have enough money the way everything fell, where I had to buy a more expensive train, I think, than a 4 train. Or I needed the money to be able to build enough tracks so I could actually do something. That I had to sell some of my shares out of my treasury from the company to put money into the company, but doing so obviously drops your stock value some more, put me in a situation where my company closed. And I was, long story short, stuck the entire play of my first play of 1849, not running a company, making very minimal money every round.
You were literally just making whatever your privates were paying you
for a little bit, and then a little bit from getting paid out from other companies as a shareholder.
I guess you did get eventually you had a couple of stocks,
but I had not anywhere near enough money to be able to do anything. So I was sitting there idle the entire game. Very bad experience. Jonah had another rough experience. Andrew thought it was very unforgiving and wasn't necessarily entirely fun, and we ended up calling it a little over halfway through the play. So,
which I just seemed to be just in an okay state most of the game, and like we basically called out the way it was going. Like, I had basically the win, and I most likely was just going to win because I just had like the most money, the most stocks, the best companies. Like, it was just, my company was just continually going up and paying out the most. Like, it was
which is funny because that's the first time I played an 18XX game where I'm like, wow, that was actually a sour experience for most of the table. But it was also frustrating, and I wanted to play it again because I know there's something there.
Yep.
So that's exactly what we did.
Yep.
We brought it back out, played it with Jonah. Andrew was out on this one.
Yep.
And we brought in Brian.
Yep.
So we still had a 4-player game. So why don't you talk a little bit more about how it went the second time, Joel?
Yeah. So the second time was just much better all around. Nobody really had a really sour experience. There were definitely some moments where companies kind of got tanked in a way that like it really wasn't. They were close to closing, but one company did close, but it wasn't necessarily at a horrible state for the owner. I think Jonah was the one who owned the company, or who was the primary owner of the company,
and he kind of he leveraged a different company and then decided to close that one.
Basically, yeah. I mean, he could have tried to float them both, but I think his other company was doing so well that it behooved him to try to keep both afloat by like getting trains going back and forth. So instead, he just kind of pumped the money from the one company into his better company and just like let that kind of move up and get a permanent train.
And then let the yellow company close out.
Yep. I think he had the orange company.
Yep, orange and yellow.
So, yeah, Jonah and I both had 2 companies. I don't think the yellow company ever came back out after it was...
Nope. I almost started it and then immediately realized that it would be a disaster.
Yeah, it would be a major disaster.
Goes to show, though, like, you have to really think about what you're doing in this game because... Yep. In other 18XX, it's not a bad idea to start a company like mid to late game.
No.
And you could potentially benefit from it.
Yep.
This one was basically going to put me, the way turn order would have fallen, I would have basically been screwed into a situation where I actually wouldn't have been able to like operate.
Yeah.
And because I don't think like I barely like by
the time
somebody would have bought
a
train. Yeah, somebody would have bought that train instead of me, and then I would need like even more money.
Yep.
And it just didn't make sense.
Yeah, because you couldn't afford a 16 train. You would have had to buy the R6, or the 6R train or whatever, right. And then somebody was going to buy it before you or something. So it was like really weird with how that was going to work out. But the kind of what made the most difference was just it didn't feel like there were that many like kind of shenanigans. It just kind of like felt like everybody just kind of like almost like played it safe.
But there could
have been though.
And I think there will be with future plays.
Yeah.
I think,
and there were cases where like something interesting could have happened, but then just like somebody took the safe route out to avoid it.
There was a situation where Jonah could have wrecked my play had he gone like first or in a different order during the operating rounds.
Yeah. And you wrecked one of my companies.
Yep.
Or wrecked its stock value. You didn't necessarily wreck like what it was planning to do, but you wrecked its stock value in such a way that like it tanked the value of my stocks and basically guaranteed that I was not going to win the game.
Now that was a fun moment in the game because Joel decided he was going to start the blue company, which is the one we talked about earlier as being an issue. But this was mid game where the blue company could be very lucrative.
Yeah. And it turned out to be one of the most lucrative.
Right. And I wanted to invest in the blue company right off the bat at that same stock round. But Joel had priority deal, so at the beginning of the stock round, he's the one that first gets to take an action. Yep. So he starts the blue company, and I realize I have enough money that I can actually buy so much stock in that company that I can take the president's share away from him, and I can become the president in that company.
Yep.
And Joel saw this coming too, so I started investing in blue. Joel was forced in to start selling some of his pink, which had been the first company you started and had been doing well for you initially.
Okay.
Yeah, early game.
It wasn't really making a lot of profit, but its stock value had mostly been going up.
Right.
And then by the end of the game, it was like one of the lowest.
Yeah.
So kind of interesting how it worked out.
Which I thought was fun seeing that dynamic in 49 where 89 companies fluctuated, but not to the extremes that I seen in 49 where you would think like, oh, that company is running really well late or early to mid game. That's probably going to run really well the rest of the game. Yeah.
Cause usually in 89, you'll use like the first company to kind of start building up some of the infrastructure for like the routes and whatnot. And then your second company will just get the routes for free and you'll just use its capitalization to just buy a big train and then use all of those routes that you already built up. But in 49, it's definitely much harder to do that because you don't have a lot of money early into the company. So you're trying to figure out how to I need a train to make some money so that I can have enough money to start my other company in such a way that it can get a train. So that managing that kind of relationship is a lot harder, I think. There's also fewer companies to start.
Yeah. Well, back to the blue company situation. Joel starts selling. He ended up I forced him to sell 2 of his shares in Pink, so that dropped his value in Pink that he had already been investing in, just so he could ensure that he kept the president's share.
Yeah,
and neither one of us were fully sure if this was something we should be wasting our time on. Should Joel really have sold his shares to keep Blue? How important would that have been for him?
Yep.
Versus, was it worth me spending that much money to just force Joel into selling shares or let me have the company? But then come next stock round, I realized whether Joel planned on doing it or not, I was putting myself at risk depending on whether he sold Blue, because he could have been in a situation where if he sold all of his Blue shares, he could have tanked the company and then I would have been stuck as the president.
Yep.
And he could have left it with the non-perm train that was a permanent train that was going to
Well, the interesting
rust.
thing is because I had 2 companies, I could dump all the money for one company into the company I was going to keep.
Right.
And then basically dump Blue back on you
with a train that's going to rust,
with either a train that's going to rust or no train
right.
based on the rusting pattern.
Yeah.
I think that train might've even rusted by the time.
So I saw that Joel could have dumped the company on me, whether he wanted to or not. I didn't know. So I wasn't going to take the risk. I sold all of my 40% of Blue shares.
Because I had 60, because I had bought the last share, which was worth 20%.
Yep. And that tanked your company. It put it just above closing.
Yep.
So you were able to just wiggle out of not closing.
Yep.
But I think that really hurt your game and kind of...
Oh, yeah, because then I started so much lower that it was hard to get that company to redeem its value. I may have made it back to where I actually made money on the initial investment. But if you wouldn't have sold your shares and it just continued to climb to eternity, then it probably would have been one of the highest value shares because all of them were gone. So it was going to continue to go straight up, which means it was going to be on the top line and just be going to the right for most of the rest of the game.
Yeah.
Now, would I have done that? Because I could have dumped it on him and made him buy a 10 train outright with no money in the company,
right?
And no way to get money in the company because all the shares are already in the bank. So it's I probably would have ended up doing that. But then it was or I could not and just have a company that's going to be one of the best values because I bought it for really cheap and it's just going to go up for eternity because it has so much money it can buy a permanent train right now.
I feel like with my first handful of plays with 18XX, especially more of the stock shenanigan ones, you're kind of looking at who is sitting well right now and am I in a position to force them to lose money in a way that could be damaging or hard to come back from.
Yep.
And that's why I think selling those Blue shares were good because even though I lost a little money because I think the stock value had decreased a little bit since I had bought into it, I made almost all of my money back, almost all of it.
And it guaranteed that I was not going to be competition for you at the top.
Yeah. And it guaranteed that you lost a lot of money on Blue.
Yep.
So that put me in a good spot. So at that point I was looking at, since Jonah was struggling, I think, with his yellow company and trying to get orange going, my competition was Brian from that point on.
Yeah. So now all you had to do was just be better, just have a better stock portfolio than Brian.
Yep.
And your stock portfolios were actually pretty close at the end of the game.
They were, but I think what helped me get my stock portfolio nice was the company that I was running, I think it was Green.
Yes.
Was making a killing.
It was making the same as Blue by the time I actually got it going because Green is right over there next to Blue and we had connected the routes in such a way that you could run the same route I could because you had your train stations in the same places I did, which I was trying to prevent, but I just couldn't get there in time before you put down one of your stations.
And I had the perfect perm train. I bought the cheapest perm train I could have bought. I bought the 10 train and the 10 train was the exact length I needed it to be to go over 10 hexes to get the maximum amount of money I could have made from my route.
Yep. And you always made at least like 25 a share.
Yep.
At like when you bought it, it was 25 a share. And then by the end of the game, it was like 35 or 40.
But you could have probably killed my game, and Brian, I think, probably would have won had you have been able to token me out where green was to make that route so lucrative for me.
Yep. Well, because then the better part about that for me is that I would have then tokened there with my other company and been able to run the same route. So then I would have been running the route double, and I would have had priority, or I would have been the primary stockholder, 60% in both companies that were making the most money compared to all the other companies for multiple rounds. And so basically 2 companies running the best route, making the most money, even though my stock values were pretty low, I was making a lot of money there.
So let's talk incremental cap. You mentioned wanting to dig into it.
Yep.
So first talk about what full cap is, or full capitalization in 1889, and then we'll get into incremental.
Yeah. So if you're not familiar with capitalization in 18XX games, basically it means when you start a company, you buy shares. So the first thing you have to do is buy a president's share, which is 20%. Well, not in all 18XX games. You can have, there's like 20, 30, 40. It kind of it fluctuates. It kind of depends, but there's like a primary shareholder, and like that's who has controlling interest in the company, and they're going to be the ones operating it every round.
Right.
So when you have the president's share, and you can only have like so much, but you start the company, you get, 2 times the whatever starting share price you started at into the company. If it's an incremental cap, if it's a full cap, nothing happens until the company floats. And so full cap is how 1889 works. You have to...
Yeah, so what do you mean by floating?
Floating. So floating means it's actually going to start operating. It actually has enough... It basically has gotten enough money funded into the company that it will... like enough people have invested in the company to say, all right, we want this to run now.
Right.
And so then when it floats, it will get all of its capitalization. So whatever the stock value set it as times 10, because 100% shares. So you have...
Yeah, so if the stock value was set at 100...
Yep, you'd get 1,000 immediately. Even though you've only sold, like in 1889, it only needs 50% to float the company. So only 50% people have paid for shares, but the company has all $1,000 of its capitalization.
Yep.
So then you get to just like immediately do a whole bunch of damage with buying trains and building a whole bunch of track. Well, not a whole bunch, but you can like build expensive track in certain locations.
And it's less risky. It's not as hard to manage because
you get it all at once.
You have that money all at once, and then you can use it as you need it. Where at 49, you have to fight and figure out different ways to be able to get that capital.
So the interesting thing about full cap is that basically once that money is gone, it's that you get
start
no more
drying
money.
up.
Yeah, because there's not really a way for the company to get money again without withholding. Which
that still kind of happens with incremental cap, but it's gradual.
Well, the difference is that with full cap, the shares that are not held by a player do not pay to the company, right?
Right.
So, but in incremental cap, the shares that are not held by a player do pay to the company.
Right.
And so that's kind of one of the big differences is that early on, you're getting money from whenever the train runs and whenever somebody pays in. Now, if only 50% of the company's been bought into, then you only have 50% of your full capitalization from the starting share price.
Yep.
But that also means that you
have 50% of shares sitting in your treasury, and anytime you pay out and you pay those dividends, which you want to do because it increases your stock value, 50% of that money that you would get from that payout is still going back into your company.
Exactly. So, and often that's more than whatever you're paying out to everybody else. Yeah. So you're getting a lot back into the company. And it runs immediately. You don't have to hit a certain threshold of shares to be able to run the company. But you have to hit a certain threshold of monetary value to be able to run the company.
So incremental cap, I found to be really fun and rewarding.
Yep.
But it's definitely a bit more challenging to handle.
Yeah. Because you can't.
There's more room for error and it's less forgiving.
Well, that's the thing is you have to plan out. Okay, I have this much money, but I need this much money. How am I going to get that money? All right, this is how I'm going to get the money. All right, then I spend it all. And then, all right, now I need to build up this much more money. And then you have to figure out how to build that. Whereas with full cap, you have all the money and then you just have to figure out how best to spend that money down to zero. And then figure out later, then after that, how am I going to do I need more money in the company, or can I just like do some train shenanigans and not have to worry about getting more money in this company?
Right.
And I'll just end up with a permanent train in it because one of my other companies will float and I'll use its capital to buy both permanent trains or something like that. Like there's the way that you kind of toss trains back and forth changes a lot between, I think changes quite a bit based on how much money you have in each company or because of the capitalization.
Do you prefer one over the other? Full cap or incremental cap?
We did mention this, but 1846 is also incremental cap.
Yeah.
So we are familiar. It wasn't just 49 that we are familiar with the incremental cap, but I do think that there's interesting decisions to be made on both sides.
Sure.
I definitely kind of agree with you that I think it's a bit easier to see the strategy right now with full cap and how you're going to spend your money. It's a little bit easier to plan that out. But I do think there's some kind of cool parts with incremental cap where you can be like, I have this money and I'm going to immediately get value out of it instead of having to wait. It feels like, basically everybody's running a company in the first round. Mm-hmm. Whereas if you have to wait for it to float, you may be just trying to figure out how you can make money on investing.
Waiting for it to float in 89 also makes it weird because you have to make sure you don't spend so much money up front at the auction that you won't be able to invest so much in your company to where it's not floating or doing anything. Yep. And then no one wants to invest in you because they know as long as they don't invest in you, you're not floating. And they really don't want to invest in you because you're not operating.
Yeah.
They want to invest in people that are going to start making them money with dividends.
Yep.
So there is definitely a challenge with full cap for sure. But beyond, like, if you can get around the whole floating puzzle and making sure you have enough money when you do start a company so you can float, it is definitely easier to handle.
For sure.
I think I like incremental cap better. I like both. I just think incremental cap is a bit more rewarding and difficult to maneuver.
Yeah.
And I think the maneuvering of the incremental cap is enjoyable. I also especially loved in 49 the added action step that you can do during the operating round where you can actually sell some of the stock that you have in your treasury from the company into the actual open market.
Yeah.
Which hurts
you could
your
do that
stock
in 46
value.
though.
You can do it in 46, but not 89.
Yeah.
Which hurts your stock value, but it gets you that immediate cash. So there is way to start liquidating some of that so you can get the money and buy the train or whatever it is you need right now at a bit of a cost. But I think it adds to the puzzle and makes it fun.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah. There's definitely more to be gleaned from 49 in such a way that like where you like get a train, like especially if you end up with two companies, like get a train and like you're closing out that company as the train's rusting, or you're closing out that company as you're giving that train to another company or something. There's definitely something there that we haven't figured out yet. But I know that there's something like where you just like make all the money you can from that company and then it closes down and you don't care about the stock value. And then you restart it at a higher value because now you have a bunch of money.
Yeah.
I definitely think there's something to be worked with there, but I've yet to figure out how to make a bunch of money from the company before like it closes, like while it's closing, like how to just make a bunch of like, I don't know if you just buy a bunch of trains, make a bunch of cash flow, and then it closes. You don't care about the stock value, and then you bump it back in. Like that's the puzzle I'm trying to figure out now.
There's a whole puzzle to work out there because I know it can be lucrative. And obviously, like if you can dump the company on somebody and force them to buy a train out of pocket, like there's a really good reason to try to like trash a company.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think my first play of 49 was rocky. Second play of 49, complete 180. It's starting to click. I really love it. I do think it's a two-step up from 89.
Yeah.
Even though like on the surface it doesn't seem that way, it's with the incremental cap and how expensive and unforgiving the game can be. It makes it seem that much more difficult when you play it.
And it feels more operational too.
It is. It's not like full stock shooting. It's there, but I think it's a good blend of the two.
Yeah. I think it's a step up from 46.
And it can let you, for sure, it can let you play a different style of game. Like, you can all try to run the good company. You're going to definitely see companies fluctuate. They're not going to just all progressively get better and better.
Yeah.
And I like that because it's realistic. And that's something that I didn't get from 46 is I felt like once the companies were up and running, they were just going to run. And it was basically just a race to get the best stock portfolio so you could win the game.
Yeah, get the best stock portfolio at the cheapest value.
49 it can take real weird twists and turns that are hard to anticipate. Like somebody at the table is noticing it and they're going to do that, big move that they've been planning, but not everybody's going to see that coming.
Yeah. Navigating like the different operating procedures of like the companies definitely is just a whole crazy
satisfying though.
Yeah.
Really
absolutely.
Fun.
Yeah.
Really fun. This is probably my single favorite. It's funny. My single favorite play of 18XX I've had to date was the last time we played 49. Yeah. And my single least favorite play of 18XX
was the first time we played it.
First time we played 49.
Yeah.
But I think we are on the up and up, and it's just going to continue to get better, especially if we keep playing with the same group and exploring more.
Yeah.
God, it's
I even think now you could start the Blue Company in such a way that you don't completely.
Yeah, I want to read up on like Board Game Geek forums for that.
I definitely think there's a way to do it that at least you don't tank it into oblivion immediately.
You're probably forced to start it at the 100 value instead of the lower value.
I think that's a better option
initially.
Yeah, but if you can somehow quickly like get up. Like if you can get a 6 train and get up to the good value, like either get over to the good value port or get up to the good value corner where the that other port is. I guess it's not really great value early, but there's a city up there and another port that there's definitely money to be made from the Blue Company early on that I think we've not quite figured out yet.
Well, I think it depends on that private, and it depends on how much starting capital you can put in it.
Yeah.
Because it's definitely like recommended that, especially as you're learning the game, to not start the Blue Company first.
Yeah.
So the second time we played it, we actually, it's supposed to be random order. We put the Blue Company at the end. So it was the last one somebody could buy.
Yep.
And I think it helped the flow of our game work out better for sure.
Yep.
Can't wait to play this one again though.
For sure. Yeah.
Very fun.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, it makes me excited to get deeper into like some of the other 18XX here that if you're watching the video, you can see on my shelf behind Nick. And also,
wait, where's 20? Yeah, that's 22, right?
There, yeah.
Okay.
You can't tell, but it's because it's sideways, but yeah. And you're dumping everything on my shelf. Way to go.
Look at that beauty though.
Yep.
So that one will hit the table sometime, hopefully.
Yep. Should be in April. At some point.
Yeah, it's a monster. Look at the back. Tells you everything you need to know about this game.
Yep. It's like a splotter, basically. So.
Cool.
Anywho. Yeah, well, one of the interesting things that we haven't touched on, but some other 18XX kind of do have some like little variants like this. But what 1849 has is that earthquake.
Oh yeah.
Where it will reset one of the tiles on the board.
This is a historical mechanic, Joel.
It is historical. But yeah, there's like an earthquake that ruins one of the cities, and so
it's very minor.
It is very minor, but I thought it was kind of an interesting little like aside to.
You take a little dip in like a couple payouts until but if two people are like focused on that route,
you build it up because
so
it's
fast.
Free to build.
Yeah,
it just takes time to build it back up.
Yep.
But it kind of is something I want to touch on in like how 18XX games can like spice it up a little bit. Like I've talked about with 1880, China having the communism, or is that what it's called? something like that.
Where they have communism in that.
Yeah, and so basically the company values don't change even if you withhold during this time period when you're. And
I think that's cool.
Yeah, and so it's like between two train buys. So it's like between like a 6 train and a 12 train or something. Between those two, in that phase, the company values don't change even if you withhold. So that's kind of cool.
Yeah, so it lets you time things correctly.
Yeah,
and you want to try to time it to where
capital.
you have to withhold during that time period instead of like before or after.
Yep. So you want to get as much money, get as many trains into the company right before that time period, and then like be able to run them and build up a bunch of capital so you can buy more trains to fulfill you for the rest of the game, or get a permanent to fulfill you for the rest of the game. But I just think it's kind of neat because I know like 1889 doesn't do anything really special with that, and 46 does the thing it does is where you can like double and triple jump on the income track.
The privates are
the stock track.
Yeah, and the privates are kind of interesting in 46.
Yeah, the privates are definitely different. You don't you draft them. You don't auction them.
They also seem to interact with the board state a little more than some of the privates in 89 and 49.
Yeah. Well, you actually have like their 46 is a bit more indicative of some of the bigger 18XX games where you have like 22, where you have like minor companies that can run trains, but they're not part of the major companies.
Yeah.
And you can like buy in a minor company, like basically a major company can eat a minor company. So that's, and that's basically what happens in 46 at some point. So it's kind of neat.
Yep.
But, so one question I wanted to ask, and we kind of touched on it already, but like what 18XX are you like most wanting to explore next?
I think probably I want to explore one with like mergers or different size companies.
Yeah. Which is 22 basically.
To see something different. Yeah.
Yeah.
For sure. I think that's probably the next one that I'm most keen on trying out.
Yeah, I definitely want to tackle 1822 next. I mean, I'd like to tackle 1830 and 44/54, but I think 22 is the one I really want to get to next.
Yep. Which 30 is just going to feel a lot like 89.
Yeah, just a bit bigger of an experience. Yeah, I do want to. There are others that I definitely want to try out that we just don't have access to. I know people have mentioned like 1817, and I think Herb mentioned 1868. Is that another
67?
67 is the one.
The Canadian one.
Yeah. So, in Ireland, I know I've heard people talk about that. That's another one that
there's like a bajillion of them that I want to play.
Oh yeah, there definitely are. But one of the ones that are just some of the ones we don't have access to that I know I want to maybe get access to at some point in some manner.
Yep.
So, yep. So I want to wrap up the episode talking about passion projects, and specifically, this is kind of the podcast and everything has really been like passion project for us. But I kind of want to touch on like, if you have a passion project that you're interested in, and you're like not necessarily sure how to get started, or maybe you're struggling to get started, or you're struggling to, actually figure out the best way to start. You're like, you have this idea, but you've just never done anything with it. So I want to, Nick kind of knows this is coming, but I want to prompt Nick for some sort of example, and we'll kind of dive into it together and figure out if, maybe this may not be your example, but we'll kind of talk through how to break it down and how to figure out how maybe best to get started on your own passion project.
Cool.
So you got an example for us, Nick?
Yes. One thing I have always wanted to do is write a book.
Okay.
And I have my own, so I'm wondering if you're going to get me to thinking the same way, but I've had this conversation with Amanda recently, and there's something that I do want to try.
Yeah.
But storytelling has always been big for me. I think literature is awesome. I think the stories that TV shows can tell are amazing, and I've always wanted to capture that. Even if it's not something that I publish, to know that I wrote a complete book from start to finish, I think would be rewarding.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a great one. That's actually the one I was hoping you pick. I think we kind of talked about it at one point, but I was like, this is one that I have an idea of maybe how to kind of start with that. So the kind of way that I'm going to break this down is slightly outlined in the book Atomic Habits by James Clear. It's kind of the way that I think I've kind of done some things personally that have really worked in that respect. And so this is kind of the way I'm going to break it down. So if you want more information on that, Atomic Habits is definitely the best place to go. So let's break that down. So if you say like, I want to write a book, well, how do you get started writing a book? And everybody's like, oh, you just write. Okay. But that's really broad. Like write what? Maybe you have this idea, or maybe you have a couple ideas and you can't really decide on one. The way that I would encourage you to get started and get in the habit of writing is just write something. So, whether that's, and we've kind of talked about, I know your wife's read the book Atomic Habits. So like, I'm sure you've kind of talked about it with her too. And I know you and I have talked about habits and things like that, but one way to get started writing is you just need to write something. I think there's a quote from like Malcolm Gladwell that like it takes 10,000 hours to be a master at something, and really has nothing to do with the length of time. It's just the fact that you need to do it over and over and over again. Sure. And so I think the best way is you just need to sit down and write something. It doesn't even have to be like what's going to actually go into a book that you want to write. Just you need to write something. And so one of the ways that actually James Clear kind of talked about it in his book is just like lowering that barrier of entry. If you're like, man, I got to write this book, and I think it's going to be like 300 pages or 700 pages or whatever, like you have this idea of how long the story is going to go, and you're trying to figure out like how do I even like frame it? Well, the best way is like lower that barrier of like how much you're going to write in a day or in a week or in a month or in a year. So just like break that down. Like, all right, what can you do today? What's the one small thing, the one like easy thing you can do today, so that a year from now you've written something. Like, so write one sentence, just one sentence a day. And if you write one sentence a day, it doesn't even have to be related to the book you're starting, but even just writing one sentence gets you in the habit of writing. And if you just write one sentence a day for a whole year, you've written 365 sentences. How many pages would that end up on if each one of those sentences went into your book? I don't really know. But the thing is, you've gotten in the habit of writing, and now you're used to writing, and now it gets easier. And, maybe after day 100, your sentence happens to be about the book, happens to be like one of the ideas for your book. And maybe now you start like almost each sentence is like a bullet point for your book. And then after you've, done it for like 100 days, it gets a lot easier to sit down and write a paragraph, because you're like, oh, I wrote a sentence. Well, I can write like 4 sentences. That'd be a paragraph. Just about, or 5 sentences or whatever. And then you just kind of like, and as you continually write more and more single sentences, you write a paragraph, and then you write a page, and then you write a chapter, or you write like 2 pages, and then you write a chapter, and then you write, a section of the book. Maybe like there's like a whole section, and you write that over the course of a month. That's like covering like one topic, or if it's, a topic based, or if it's like a fiction based book, maybe you write, one character's like sub story. Maybe you're going to end up then breaking out that story over 10 chapters, but maybe you kind of write out their story in like 1 month, you focus on that character. But it all started with just writing one sentence. And so that would be maybe one way that I would do it. What do you have any thoughts about, the things I've mentioned, or is there a way that you've considered that maybe works better for you? Or
well, nothing has worked for me yet because I haven't written a book.
Sure.
So I think the first, I like where you're going with like writing a sentence a day, or maybe even, I think writing a paragraph a day seems very reasonable to me. And that way you're linking sentences together. And maybe if you are worried that you're not at the writing level you want to be able to write the book that you want to write, then maybe like writing paragraphs that are irrelevant to the actual story. Yeah. Just, I don't know, come up with, Reddit actually has writing prompt subreddit. Oh, yeah. So you could maybe just go off of one of those, riff off of that, and write a paragraph from a writing prompt and do that every day until you start getting a knack for it and you feel comfortable with it. And then I could see like maybe writing a paragraph a day or taking that to just write a page a day. Yeah. And if you could write a page a day for an entire year, that's 365 pages.
That's a book.
That is a novel.
Yep.
Right. That could, depending on the size of the book, that could be 2 books or half of a book. But I would say that would more often than not, 365 pages is quite a book. Yeah. You can have a lot of story in those pages. So I think that is cool. And I think, because I was listening to a Rich Roll's podcast and they were talking about similar stuff. And that's what they had mentioned. He had a writer
James
on.
Clear on?
It wasn't James Clear.
Because he did have him on at one point, and I think I listened to part of that podcast. Yeah. So that's why I didn't know if that was him.
I'll probably need to listen to that. I think Amanda listened to that. Yep. But obviously.
Yeah. When his book was coming out, he was on a lot of podcasts that I listened to.
I think that's where Amanda got excited about it.
So like Rich Roll, Matt D'Avella, I think he was on the Minimalists. So like those are, or I don't really listen to a lot of Rich Roll, but like Matt D'Avella and the Minimalists, like he was on, though I think he was on Rich Rogan or not
Joe Rogan.
Yeah. We both just like wrong names. Joe Rogan. He was just on a bunch. And so like I've listened to a bunch of those and, but yeah, anyway.
Yeah. So I think what I want to do, I think just writing like a sentence or a paragraph a day to get comfortable with writing is a good idea. But at the same time, I think I need to be building the story. I know some people just start writing and then they let the story kind of fall into place as they write. Yeah. Like that's something that Stephen King has always like famously said that's how he writes. Yeah. Which is also, I think, kind of why sometimes his endings sort of just happen. Yeah. And they're not as fulfilling. I feel like I would need to write by not necessarily having every minor detail in place, but having the big plot points and knowing what I'm aiming towards and what I'm working towards. Yep.
And then filling out the story in between.
Yeah. So I need to do like a storyboard or an outline laying out kind of the direction that I intend the story to go. And it may diverge. You know, you may get to a point in the book and you're like, you know what, this plot point that I was going for, actually I have a better idea and this is what we're going to do.
Yeah. I would definitely encourage you to try to break down that storyboard as small as you can because it's a lot easier to tackle a small unit of a small piece of that. Right. Than it is to try to be like, look at the entire storyboard and be like, oh, I got to write all of this. Whereas if you just write down like, you know, the 5 bullet points you want to cover.
Well, that's kind of like
this month.
If you can break it up into chapters and say like, this is the plot point that's going to happen in this chapter and the next chapter. So every time you get to a new chapter, all you have to do is work around how do I get this plot point to happen in a,
how do I get from this point that I was at in chapter 1 to this point that I want to be at the end of chapter 2.
So so what I want to do is start writing like a page a day. I want to lay out the story on what I think it's going to be, focus on each chapter, and then just write a page a day. I think that is a very reasonable ask. Yeah.
And I would even say like, you know, I know you and I have talked that you've had a couple of ideas about writing, but if you like don't have an idea, I would encourage to even just start writing now while you think of more ideas. And maybe you just journal. You just journal about your day and you write 1 paragraph about your day.
That's what they talked about on the Rich Roll podcast is journaling.
Yeah. So the easiest way to get started in writing is just journaling. Yep. And so like that's definitely something I would encourage. Like if you don't have like, even if you don't have the outline yet, just start writing down 1 sentence or 1 paragraph of just like a journal of some kind. And I think that would definitely get you started in writing. And so that then when you finally do sit down and get those story points, you're already in the habit of writing. It's so easy to sit down and be like, oh, I can write a paragraph about that story point.
Yep.
And you know, if writing is not one of the, is not, you know, a passion project that you've considered, you know, if maybe you've wanted to start a podcast. I mean, the best thing that I would say to do is literally just, you don't even need a fancy mic. Like you can buy something for $20. I mean, we've kind of talked about it on the podcast before about getting started with podcasting, but the easiest thing is just get some sort of like $20 USB mic. Doesn't have to be great quality and just start recording and just get used to hearing like your voice being played back to you as you're editing or doing whatever, and just get used to talking in front of a mic. I can't even talk in front of a mic still.
Yeah. It's a continual problem for all of us.
But just get used to that process. And then at some point, you upgrade your mic or you start publishing it. Like, don't even publish. Like, I think we recorded 2 episodes before we published. We probably should have recorded 10 before we published.
Oh yeah. If not more.
So like, I encourage you, like, do it 10 times before you publish. Like, it's fine if nobody hears it. It's fine if, nothing happens from it, but like, you'll just be a lot better for it. Just like building that habit of doing the recording is so much more important than like mastering it. Like trying to master something on the first try. Like pretty much nobody can do that.
Yeah. I think you said it. It's just building the habit, making it something habitual you do every day.
Yeah. Like, I mean, this isn't necessarily a passion project, but something I've just started doing, and I've done it now for 2 months. I've had, times when I kind of stopped, but I kind of took an idea that James Clear had in his book of like, never miss a day, you can miss one day, just never miss 2 days in a row. And I've been doing push-ups, and I've added sit-ups to that routine, like every night before I go to bed. And I've not necessarily like super increased the amount of push-ups that I can do over the time, but I've consistently done them. And I noticed that I'm getting, I noticed the small changes over time because I'm writing down how many I can do in my notebook every night. So it's like, I did 30. Okay. 30. I did, 30 push-ups, 60 sit-ups or something. And I write both of those down, and then I can see the progression over time, like how many I've done. So I started out push-ups. I think I only did I was only doing like 20, and I was struggling on number 20 to get back up. And now I'm struggling on number 30, and soon it'll be 35.
Right.
And like for sit-ups, like my core doesn't actually start burning until about, like at first it was around 40, and now it's around like 60. It doesn't start, or really like around 50. And then I push through to get to 60 while it's burning, because you just want to continue to burn. Now, mind you, that's not going to turn, like, I'm not going to have amazing abs or like, like amazing looking arms overnight.
Not with all that beer you drink.
No, that's not, that doesn't help. But like the point is that I'm more in the habit of doing it.
Right.
And then, slowly I will add more things to it, or I will end up shifting that to some sort of workout routine instead. As I have like easier access to a gym. Like I have, rock climbing gym, but like it's so much harder to get up there. But my new apartment place will have a gym open 24/7 in there. So I'm probably going to try to move that routine to being in the gym, and I will do more things. But now I've already built the habit of doing the push-ups and the sit-ups. It's a lot easier in my mind to go, I can go do,
because you are being active already.
Yeah. I can go like add pull-ups to that, or add, squats to it, with a bar and like 45 pounds or something, like nothing crazy, just doing it. Mm-hmm. And then as you do it, it's a lot easier to add on more weight and, all of those things, or do more reps or whatever. So, this kind of transformed from passion projects to habits, but like that was kind of the point I was trying to get across, is like, if you want to start anything new, building the habit of doing it is so much more important, and trying to break that down into the easiest piece that you can do to just get started is the best way to go. It's so much easier to just like not try to tackle everything at once, because then you just like get exhausted and you're like, I can't do this. And you convince yourself you can't do it. But if you just take a small piece, you're like, I can do that. I can do 5 minutes. Yeah. I can do 10 minutes, whatever. And then just grow that over time.
Yeah. Good advice. So
I hope so. I don't know. We'll see. I mean, somebody wrote a whole book about it. I'm just like regurgitating the information basically. So I think that pretty much wraps up this episode, pilot episode of 18Xonomics. So
great name.
Oh yeah. 'Cause you thought of it. Yeah. That's the only reason you think so, but anyway,
I know a great name when I hear one, Joel.
Oh, do you? Okay. Yeah. Whatever you say.
You have to say it. It's your show.
What? Oh yeah. Remember to keep cardboard gaming a reality in your life.
See you later, folks.
Bye everybody.